Good morning, church. Hope you are doing well this morning. I often like to start my sermons with something interesting or positive, but today I'm going to read you some excerpts from interesting reports, not necessarily the happiest thing you've ever heard. You might have heard about this just a few months ago. The U.S. Surgeon General released a public crisis statement. And it's called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And it's an 85-page report about what is going on in our country concerning loneliness. And so here are some highlights. One quote is this: "Loneliness and isolation are more widespread than any of the other major health issues of our day, including smoking, diabetes, and obesity." Here's another quote. "A 2022 study found that when people were asked how close they felt to others emotionally, only 39% of adults in the U.S. said they felt very connected to others." Then you've got some stats on the financial cost to the country of this. Social isolation among older adults accounts for an estimated $6.7 billion in excess Medicare spending annually, largely due to increased hospital and nursing facility spending. And then comes the cost to the individual person. Lacking social connection can increase the risk for premature death as much as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. In addition, poor or insufficient social connection is associated with increased risk of disease, including a 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. Furthermore, it is associated with increased risk for anxiety, depression, and dementia. Welcome to church today. So glad that you are here. I mean, I read through a lot of this report and just my heart just sank. Like, what? Why? How? This can't be true. This can't be happening. What is going on? Most of us are aware, on one level, that there does seem to be something just off. And it's really strange because we live in an amazing country where we're incredible technology. There's medical advances all the time. Robust economy, easy to travel. Like it's an amazing place and an amazing time in the history of the world to live, and yet, like, what is going on? Like, it is a crisis. So I started doing more digging and research into, like, how did we get to this moment? And here's some interesting things I found. So one, we're going back in time here. This is Hector Crevaux. He's a Frenchman. And he traveled to the U.S. very early, right around the time of the Revolutionary War, because he wanted to understand the culture of the new land. And there was a lot of readers in Europe who wanted to hear, okay, what's going on across the Atlantic Ocean? So he wrote a lot about it. One of the interesting observations he made is he was here quite a while, and he would observe the relationship between the colonists from Europe and the Native Americans and how they got along or did not get along, and he paid a lot of attention to that. So here's some things he wrote about that. He said, "Thousands of Europeans are Indians, and we have no examples of even one of those Aborigines having from choice become Europeans." So he's observing something, that there are at least some, and keep in mind there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of colonists and Europeans, but some of them are actually going to these native people and adopting their way of life. However, he doesn't see the reverse happening. Like, nobody from these Native American tribes is going willingly and adopting the life of these Europeans, even though their medicine is far better, weapons are better farming, but they're not going that way. And so he's trying to figure out what's going on here. So he also says this in his explanation: "There must be in their social bond," talking about the Native Americans, "something singularly captivating and far superior to anything to be boasted of among us." So he's getting at something. there's something going on with the colonists early that these Native Americans don't really like, and there's something going on with the Native Americans socially that at least some of the Europeans are saying, that's interesting, we like that. So what exactly is that? So here's another guy that named it. His name is Alex Tocqueville. Very similarly, he traveled to America for about a year, trying to understand the development of this new country, and he named the most unique characteristic of the people of this country early on. Anybody have a guess as to what it was? Individualism. So he writes about it this way: American individualism is a deliberate sentiment which deposes each citizen to isolate himself from his fellows and to draw apart. So isn't that interesting that of all the things he could have written about, the thing he's most blown away by is this sense of individualism. People are not making decisions based on the group they're a part of, whether that's their family or their church or some other organization. Primarily, people are living their lives and making decisions based upon the idea of, I have to look out for me, my success, my achievement. Again, this is not recent, this is hundreds of years ago. These people are pointing out this strong sense of individualism. So, now put these pieces together. Think about this. Early on in the country's history, we have these deep seeds of individualism because we're breaking away from Britain. And then that just festers for 200 years. Individualism, individualism, individualism. And then, fast forward to about 20 years ago, what happens? You have the advent of the iPhone, followed then by Amazon, DoorDash, Netflix, Google, now AI. So we're now at the point where you literally don't have to leave your house to have everything you need to survive. So you have the philosophy of individualism, which has now been matched by the technology of individualism, and they are a wicked pairing. And then you have a pandemic. That's why we have the epidemic of loneliness in the country. Like it makes sense when you think about it historically. Of course we would get to this point. So another author, he puts it this way. His name's Jake Meador, and he's a cultural analyst. He's just looking at our culture, trying to figure out what's going on, and he has some very poignant remarks. He says, contemporary America simply is not set up to promote mutuality, care, or common life. Rather, it is designed to maximize individual accomplishment as defined by professional and financial success. Such a system leaves precious little time for energy for forms of community that do not contribute to one's own professional life or, as one ages, the professional prospects of one's children. There's a lot in there to really consider. So the first thing he's saying is individualism. Again, we're so much of what we do as a culture is personal achievement. We're trying to succeed as individual people, and so what that means is we don't have any time or energy left for any kind of group that doesn't promote our own success. Or in other words, any form of community that does not advance your career or make your kid better at a sport is not worth our time. This is the point that we find ourselves in history. And so we are studying this year as a church family, Follow Me. And so the question becomes, what would Jesus have to say about this? And more importantly, as we're looking at adopting the rhythms of Jesus, like how would Jesus embody his life, and what would he do? How would he practice his relationships in this culture where we're very individualistic? So I know most of what I've said so far is really bad news, but here's some good news. Most of you in the room are followers of Jesus, or you want to be a follower of Jesus. And so what that means inherently in who you are and who I am is that we don't have to acquiesce to the cultural vices of today. I'm highlighting one, individualism, but there's so many cultural vices that we see all the time in this country, in this world. But as a follower of Jesus, part of your identity, part of my identity is we're set apart. We don't have to be this way. We can choose to follow a different roadmap, a different blueprint for life. And so I'd like to read two passages to you from the life and teachings of Jesus, and then think about what might this mean for how we follow our Lord today when our world is so fragmented. So here's the first one. This is Luke chapter 6. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. We don't know what he prayed about, but we do know what happened next. Verse 13, when morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So Luke is it's very important to Luke to point out all these details of the people that Jesus spent the night, that from what we assume is he prayed for these people. And so the thing I want to point out here is that Jesus' prayer life was very robust, and in a few weeks we'll talk more and more about this. Jesus prayed about lots of things. In this story, he spends the night, hour after hour after hour, communing with his Father. And what does he pray about? Again, it doesn't say exactly, but what we can assume if he gets up in the morning and picks the disciples out is that he's spending a lot of these hours of the night praying specifically for his community. So before it becomes a reality in Jesus' life, it begins in his prayer life. So for you, as you think about your relationships, and if you want to be one of a kind of man or a kind of woman that pushes back against the tyranny of loneliness in our culture, I would argue that it begins with your prayer life. The first thing you can do is you can pray for your friendships. And this can take a lot of forms. So one thing we can do for our friendships is we can pray for the physical, emotional, and spiritual lives of our friends. Rather than be jealous of certain friends, or rather than being disappointed or irritated with people you know, we can simply pray for them. This is something I'm so stunned by when I read Paul's letters. It's how specific his prayers are. I think part of what it means to grow as a disciple of Jesus is to learn to pray very specifically about the maturation of your own soul. And then still another step in spiritual maturity is the ability to pray the depths of somebody else's spiritual progress. So you can do this with your friendships. You pray for your friends that they might be closer and closer and closer to God. Another way you can pray for your friendships is what Jesus does here. You pray to have new friendships and new relationships. Jesus is praying here at the beginning of his friendships with these disciples. And so you might be at a season of life right now where you don't have a lot of close friends. This is where it starts. You say, Lord, would you put people in my path where I can love these people, I can bless these people. You pray your way into relationship. Pray for your friendships. Here's a second text. This is John chapter 13. Powerful text here. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to his Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now loved them to the end. Or sometimes the translation says, he showed them the fullest extent of his love. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. And then look at verse 3. It gives us a glimpse into what Jesus knows. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This is a stunning text. So the author John is careful to point out several things. One, John wants us to know that Jesus knew that Jesus had all the power and all the authority. Jesus knows that. He is not naive to his own power. Secondly, John wants us to know that Jesus understands his purpose. He knows he came from God. He knows he's returning to God. And so Jesus, he gets what a lot of us want. Or Jesus has finally possessed what many of us spend our entire lives trying to get to, which is it's this point in your life where you fully know who you are and why you're here. Like you've got it. You're fully aware of your identity. You understand the will of God. You feel an incredible clarity about what exactly you're supposed to do with your life. That Jesus is there. He knows it. He understands it. And what does he do? He washes feet. Isn't that amazing? Like, this is one of the most stunning pictures of God in the entire Bible. It's where divinity meets dirt. And the one thing I want to highlight here for just a minute is this is premeditated love. He's thought about it. Like, this isn't just, random, maybe I'll do something nice for my friend because I just thought of it in the moment. No, Jesus made a plan to love his friends, and then he ends this scene by telling them, now that I have done this for you, I want you to do this for one another. So here's a second thing you can do if you want to push against the tyranny of loneliness in the country. One, you can pray for your friendships. Two, pursue them. In other words, be really, really proactive in your relationships and your friendships. We're good at being proactive in some things in life. My guess is there's some of you in the room, you can crush a to-do list. You write it out, you knock it off one at a time, and you feel really good when you scratch off items from your list. My guess is that tomorrow morning, many of you from like 8:30 a.m. to noon, it's going to be some of the most productive hours of the week for you. You're going to go to your job and you're going to start checking things off. My guess is that some of you have a time of the week where you just go at it on your house or yard work and you get it done. Like, we know what it means to be productive. What would that look like if you took that energy and you applied it specifically to your friendships? See, for a lot of us, we assume that's like not good. Like, well, I'm not getting anything done. That's just a luxury of life. That would be lazy if I spent time pursuing and investing in my friendships. That's not really getting work done. The washing of the feet is the last lesson that Jesus teaches his disciples before he dies. In chapter 15, he calls them friends. And he washes their feet, as if to say, I'm about to die, and the last thing that I want to leave you with is this: I need you, I want you, my final desire for you is that you would take care of each other. In other words, if you want to push back against the loneliness and the tyranny and the isolation that is crippling our country, it's going to take some effort. Like, you're not going to fall into this randomly. Like, you will not get a phone call today where someone on the other end says, congratulations, you just won the friendship lottery, and despite doing no work of your own, you will now be blessed by having deep, meaningful, and abiding friendships. That doesn't happen. Like, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. And so imagine for a moment that you were to spend the first fruits of your energy and your time and maybe your resources to specifically invest in people in your life. Like, in other words, like today you were to say, okay, Lord, who would you want me to be closer to? And you have this person come to your mind and you start praying for that person. And then this month you really invest in that person. Let's spend time together. Let's work on their relationship. If you did that, can you imagine the difference that it would make in your life? Yes, there'd be risk involved. There's always risk when it comes to relationships, but relationships do work when we put in the work. So again, this story, the washing of the feet, it's all about premeditated love. See, I think when I think about this, the epidemic of isolation, and then I think about Scripture, I think, what would Jesus do? Like if he were here on earth and he were to intersect this culture of loneliness? What do you think he would do? I imagine him, first of all, weeping, just like he does for Jerusalem. He would be so broken over his people who are broken. And then beyond being upset about the loneliness, I think he would push back. I think he would spend his days inviting and this person and that person, and why don't you come walk with me, and you spend the day with me, and let's go have a meal together. Let's take a walk by the lake. Like, he would bless and encourage and heal, and he would push back over and over. Day after day after day, he would get up and say, who will I love today? Who will I encourage today? Like he wouldn't just stand by and allow this epidemic of loneliness to cripple him or the people he loved. He would push back. And here's the truth. We are supposed to be the body of Christ. In other words, the way that the world perceives who Jesus is in our world is through his body, which is the church. And so therefore, we are to take the mission of Jesus, and we are supposed to make it our mission. Jesus' heart breaks over loneliness, and he would do something about it, and I'm convinced we are to be the kind of people who do something about it. And so what would this mean for you this week? One thing I'd say to this in more practical terms is, if you remember 3 or 4 months ago, I preached a sermon about, I don't know what I exactly called it, but it was about friendship styles. Not every friend responds to love the same way. And so you might think through that again. There are certain people in your life, and you can love them by encouraging them. There's other people in your life, and you love them through serving them. Like you do something tangible for that person. And still there's other friends in your life, and you love them by listening to them. You don't talk about yourself. You don't tell a bunch of stories. You just ask a few questions, follow up. You listen to these people. So one way you can practice this sermon is simply asking yourself the question again, Lord, who do you want me to love? How do you want me to love them? Here's a few other ideas about how your relationships might improve even this week through the life of this church. Next week, I'm going to give you a very specific challenge for your relationships, but this week, more broadly speaking, I want to give you a few thoughts on how do relationships even function in this church. Primarily, they happen based in 3 different buckets. Number 1 is our Bible class system. So I was consulting with the church in Arkansas recently, and they were asking all sorts of questions about Memorial Road, and they asked about our Bible class system, and I said, 85% of the people that go to worship service also attend Bible class. And it was a group of elders and staff in the room, and their eyes got really big, and they said, what? What percentage? I said, yeah, 85% of people that go to worship service attend Bible class, and they were shocked. It's arguably the most compelling statistic from the life of our church family. It's amazing. Our Bible class system functions in many ways as the backbone of our church family. Many of you are involved in a Bible class. It's a great way to meet people, to pray with people, to do life with people. That's one bucket. Another one is Celebrate Recovery. If you're looking for a way to just live life and walk with people, Celebrate Recovery. Every Friday, 7 o'clock, you'll meet people who are willing and want to walk alongside you as you go through life. Here's a final thing I'll mention. It's our small group ministry. Over the last 5-6 years, this has been the ministry in our church which has had the most growth. It's a pretty remarkable ministry. In fact, Memorial Road is a huge church, and our small group ministry is arguably the chief way that the big church gets small, and it's a really, really critical ministry. I want to invite one of my friends and new co-workers and just a great man of God, Mitch East, to the stage. There's an event that's going to happen on Wednesday this week, and I'd like you to hear from Mitch about what this is and why you should come. So Mitch, tell us about small groups and about this event that's going to happen on Wednesday.
All right, well, hopefully I can be heard through this microphone. So I want you to imagine in your heads 3 different rooms. First, your living room. Second, a Bible class in this church. And third, this sanctuary. Just think about those 3 rooms for a second. In this room, it is very easy to be anonymous. You could come in right when church service started. You could leave as soon as the sermon is over. Phil is thinking, please don't do that. But then no one could have to know that you were here today. If you went to a Bible class after this service, it would be much harder to be anonymous, but you could still do it. You could go to the back row. You wouldn't have to necessarily speak up in class. You could be silent, and as soon as things wrapped up, you could leave. It is very difficult to be anonymous in someone's living room. If you go to our small groups, it's really hard to remain anonymous. And that's kind of the principle behind our small groups ministry. We want to reduce the number of anonymous brothers and sisters in Christ. So if you are interested in being involved more, I'd encourage you to come to this summit. And it really is available to all. You might lead or host a small group right now in your home. I'd love to see you there. We will encourage and equip you with more resources. If you attend a small group, you're going to be challenged to step up more. If you are open to starting a new small group, we'll give you resources on how to do that. And if you have the slightest amount of interest in joining a small group, please come. We're going to find and do our best to find a way for you to join one. I think one thing that's true about small churches, to Phil's point a second ago, is that if you go to a church of about 50, 75 people, everybody can know everybody. And that's a strength of small churches. But at this church, we just can't do that. So our goal is different. We want everyone to be known by someone. And that actually is possible. We want to find a spot in someone's living room for you and your family, and we want you to be known. We don't want any more anonymous brothers and sisters in Christ. So this summit is happening this Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 in Fellowship Central. I really look forward to seeing you there, and I'd love to meet you if you're able to come. Thanks, Phil.
Mitch, thank you so much. That's a great line. We want everyone to be known by someone. Thank you for that. And thanks, just so you know, Mitch has put in so much work over the last few months in his new job, and specifically for this summit on Wednesday. So I really hope you can attend. I want to make one note of a name change. So historically, our groups have been called Q groups, and we are making a switch on that name. And let me give you a few reasons why we're doing this. Number one, if you're an insider and you've been here a long time, that's what you think. Oh yeah, they're Q groups. That's what they are. But for newcomers, they don't have a clue what that means or what they are. Like, what's Q? And then the newcomer will ask a member, what's the Q stand for? And the member's like, I don't know, just what they're called. So no one, and the Q does have a biblical origin with the Hebrew word, but that never really caught on. And so for the newcomer, it is pretty hard to know what they even mean. So that's part of the reason we're switching it to just small groups. We're going to call them small groups. This is also what we did many years ago. This church used to be called the College Church of Christ because it was started in a classroom at Oklahoma Christian University. And then we realized in the 90s, you know what? It's not just for college students. We need to make a name or change a name so that it appeals to more people. So we're doing this because it's better for people that don't know our culture. A second reason that we are changing the name from Q group to small group is that since we started these groups many years ago, that letter Q has just taken on different meanings in our culture in various ways. So for example, QAnon wasn't really a thing, 15, 20 years ago. And so we want to shift away from that language. We'll be descriptive. They're called small groups. Obviously, this is going to be hard for a lot of us who are used to that language, and that's okay. But just know from a leadership standpoint, we're going to start using the word small group instead of Q group. Turn your attention to the screen. I'd like you to watch this promotional video for our small group summit.
A lot of our friends in our class were already in a small group. Kind of after doing some talking, we realized from a few friends, they're like, hey, we really need someone to start a new group.
Amy and I had this kind of internal tension for a couple of years because we loved our group so much. Literally after about 2 years of thinking about it, praying about it, we eventually decided to spin off of the Perkins and that group and form our own.
Graduating and that big transitionary period, I knew I needed a solid community to meet up with every week.
We kind of made a list of people and had no idea what the response was going to be. Some people we knew pretty well, but some people we didn't.
We had been praying to find good godly friends within our community, and we met our best friends in our class at church, and we feel like because of our small group, it was a good way for us to really get plugged in and get to know them really fast.
We started at Memorial Road a little over a year ago. We're looking for a small group to join. We didn't see many other options for small groups at the time, and so we decided to start our own.
Anytime we host, I gotta mow the yard.
Your house doesn't have to be perfect to have people into your house. Our house is rarely perfect or that really clean. It's still really messy.
But whenever you're in a home and then you sit around a table together and you have a meal, I just think it feels more like family.
Life happens, right? You're gonna go through ups and downs over the course of the years, and being able to have that consistency of people in your life that you can share those experiences with and just do life together.
And you get connected a whole lot quicker and a whole lot on a deeper level than just 5 or 10 minutes of kind of small talk before service or before class or after that.
There's a lot of rough things have happened, and I don't know if I would have made it through without the people in my small group supporting me and just really encouraging me and making sure I was all right.
When I had Addie, our third child, I was in the hospital a whole lot after that for weeks afterwards. And we're gonna cry when we share this, but one time we came home from the hospital and our Q group cleaned our house. And they didn't have to do that. And just the fact that they did that all by themselves, and I was grateful that they did it. It was so helpful. I will never forget that they did that for us.
The thing that I have found with the small group is the depth in my relationships. These are the deepest relationships I have ever had in my life.
It's a really great opportunity for families to grow and study and learn together.
I will admit I felt like I really didn't need this.
Before the small group, I was very kind of introverted, not a lot of relationships or the willingness to go out of my way to develop those types of relationships.
But I'll tell you that being around another group of 6 or 7 guys that are in my station of life, I would admit that it's been helpful to me and I've benefited from, even though going into it, I might not have thought I really needed that.
But being in a small group almost in a good way forces you to develop those types of relationships and open up a little bit more.
One of the guys from our Q group, we've already gone out and gone golfing and been able to share one-on-one time with each other and get to know each other that way better.
I would say even in our 8 months, our families each have had certain challenges and stresses and losses in the last 8 months that have been very difficult, and it's been really nice to have people you trust because you've been with them, that you can open up with.
It feels a little scary to start something new, but knowing that we had friends to do it with and it wasn't all on us, and if we were out of town, someone else could host or someone else could coordinate, and I think that just made it much more achievable.
Starting a small group was so easy. The resources were available for us to go pull off the shelf.
On the outside, it's nothing fancy or special, but what we got out of it is really special.
What we need in the coming years, more than anything else, is people who are willing to step up and be hosts of small groups. Half of my job is to be the small groups minister of this church. So if you need something, I'd love for you to contact me. email me, call me. I want to help you. We have tons of resources to get you started. Every week, we put out Bible studies, sermon-based discussion questions, and if you have any needs, I want to be there for you. So reach out anytime, and we'll give you the resources you need to start your group.
So let me encourage you simply to start where you are in your relationships. If you are new to the church or new to the community, you don't have friends, don't give up. It's really hard. It takes a lot of work, but you can do it. If you've got a lot of pre-existing relationships and they're okay, maybe you need to maintain them. Friendships are like cars. You gotta perform maintenance. Or it could be that you're out of the habit and you have some historic legacy friends from years ago, but you really haven't pursued them or tried in any way in a long time. Maybe it's time this week. So start where you are, because the reality is relationship really is at the center of discipleship. You can't follow Jesus without investing time in your friendships, in your people, in your church. It's part of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And the reason that this is true is because Jesus, when he's on earth, what he's doing is he's modeling the life that he already has with the Father and the Spirit. Jesus' ministry was simply an expression of what was already going on in heaven. Like Jesus is already in relationship with God, with the Spirit. Like you were made in the image of a triune community that we call God. If you go deep into the soul, the heart of who God is, he's not static. And he's not even singular. Their relationship is the core of who God even is. And so Jesus has that in heaven with the Father and the Spirit, and he comes to the earth, and so much of his life is simply an expression and an outgrowth of his own relationship with God, and then he invites us into that kind of a life. So you are made in the image of relationship. So therefore, if you try to do life alone, it's not going to be a very good life. So start where you are, and maybe today that simply means find a friend to love. We're going to sing a song, and if you have any need that this church can help you with, I'd love you to come tell me about that. We'd be happy to pray for you. We'd be happy to baptize you or take care of any need that you have. Let's stand and let's sing.